And Ghana has no laws governing seller and buyer relationships, and that's exactly what we're discussing this morning in the chamber.
Is there any law on consumer protection in Ghana?
Well, it depends on how you tackle the question. As an act of parliament, there is no act of parliament concerning consumer protection in Ghana, but generally speaking, when you look at the common law on consumer protection, yes, it is applicable. So the fact that there is no law in Ghana does not mean that you cannot enforce your rights as a consumer. Indeed, you can. The only challenge will be that you will be relying on the common law to be able to enforce your rights in the absence of a substantive legislation on the subject.
If you're talking about the common law, exactly how does it protect the rights of the consumer?
Well, the common law, it's a term used to refer to case law which were developed in England and the Commonwealth, which are applicable here in Ghana. And so if you look at our legal regime, the common law, if you look at the Constitution of Ghana, Article 11, the common law forms part of our laws as a country, and therefore you can always fall on the common law to be able to enforce certain rights under the law.
Now, it's not unusual to walk into a store and see someone displaying goods sold are not returnable. Is it right? Is it justified under this law?
It depends on the kind of relationship between the buyer and the seller. Okay, now this falls into an area known as contract law. Okay, now what happens usually, it's been decided that the point of the completion of the contract is where, or the point of execution of the contract is where the buyer pays for the item, then the contract is concluded at that point. Now, if you go to a shop, now you see that goods sold are not returnable, there's a huge notice there, or before you pay for the item, you are told that the goods sold are not returnable. It forms part of the contract of sale. It forms part of the contract of sale. But that notwithstanding, it does not take away the right of a buyer to sue upon the basis that the goods are not fit for the right purpose, or that there is a breach of warranty, in that you expected, or the goods you bought were meant for a certain reason, or you are supposed to put them to a specific use, or there's some material defect in those goods. You can always sue based on the law of contracts. So yes, generally you can sue when it comes to buying and selling of items, goods. You can sue under the Contract Act and under the general law of.
Okay, so does the law give too much power to the consumer?
I believe that there is a fair balance. The consumer has rights, the seller or the seller equally has rights, and there are cases where you find that the seller is pursuing the buyer in order to enforce certain rights, which mostly have to do with payments. But on the reverse, you have the buyer enforcing rights such as late delivery of goods, or that the goods are not fit for the purpose for which they were acquired, or that the seller made a representation as to the state in which the goods are, but when you got them, they do not meet those specifications, and therefore you are rejecting them. So these are the things which come to play. And so both, for me, I think there is a fair balance between the rights of these two people who are at play. In law, there's something known as caveat emptor, which is the buyer beware. And so if you are going to buy something, you have a primary responsibility to ensure that the buyer, you as the buyer, you are buying what you really need. You have the duty to inspect what you are buying. You don't take it away. You should be vigilant when purchasing these goods. Exactly.
How necessary is it to have a law governing consumer protection? Well,
I have always held the opinion that we do need a consumer protection legislation in this country, because if you would notice throughout our interview, we've been making reference to goods, but consumers don't only consume goods, there are services. Okay, there are services, and therefore, if you take, for instance, the telecommunication industry, okay, people are always unhappy with the services that are being rendered, the substandard services that are being rendered. How is there some framework, some policy framework backed with legislation that a person, a consumer within that sector will be able to enforce? There are people who complain about internet broadbands but are unable to do anything about it. Okay, so with a legislation like that in place, okay, it makes sure that the rights afforded to a consumer are easily enforceable in the courts of law. That is one. And two, it also places a check on people who provide these services and people who sell goods, okay, so that they are able to arrange their affairs in such a way that it is in conformity with the law, so that they don't open themselves up to any liability.
There have been bodies set up, the NCA, the MPA, etc., to ensure that there are set standards in the industry. Now, many people argue that these institutions have failed to live up to their mandate. In such a case, can anyone test a law by bringing these people to the law courts? Is it possible?
Well, yes. The first thing one would have to do is to look at the enabling legislation or the establishment legislation which sets up these institutions, and it will tell you how to go about bringing an action against them. Now, you have to look at the objectives in these legislation, the objectives of these institutions as provided by law, because, and among other things, to find a ground in law to be able to sue, because you can't just go to court without a cause of action. You can't just get up and go to court without a cause of action. And so you need to be able to do some formidable research to be able to find a cause of action upon which you can sue.